Rosicrucian Space Force.
He won't be long, he won't be long. He will be back, he will be back. He knows it's all, he made us all, he made us all. He won't be long, he won't be long. He will be back, he will be back. Jesus my Lord, he knows us all.
All right, so I've got Daniel Burke and Jason Ross from the Schiller Institute, and we're going to be talking about How the Nation Was Won, America's Untold Story, Volume 1, 1630 to 1754 by H. Graham Lowry. And Daniel was kind enough to give me this book at the CPI conference. It's probably the best part of the conference, actually, was getting this book, because this book was awesome. I was reading it on the flight, and when it got to Malthus's grandfather poisoning Queen Anne, I was like apoplectic. I was like, how the fuck did I not know this already? But it put together a few strands of things that I already had some knowledge of, but I didn't know quite how far the connections went between like the Churchill and Malthus family back to the reign of the Hanoverians.
Yeah, well, if you want to know my general perspective on the book, it's that this is a proof that it is possible for a conspiracy for the good to create a total shift in the history of mankind. And this lays it out very clearly. So isn't that, so it's a really powerful thing to share with people right now.
Yeah, I mean, that's sort of like what my obsession has been generally, is I've been, tracking these sort of Rosicrucian and a lot of these various like peasant movements and quote unquote heretical movements in Christianity for like, from its foundations for millennia. And I see this like a kind of continuity of what you might call like a conspiracy for the good, right? They would call it the church invisible and elect, and this is the sort of history that I like following all the time. I mean, I have some like minor quibbles, of course, considering there seems to be like a push in at least the H. Graham Lowry is pretty close to the general like Larouchean hermeneutic of viewing someone like Francis Bacon as an occultist, but then being very like admiring towards someone like John Winthrop Jr., when I consider them basically to be a part of the same like lineage and project, considering that, John Winthrop Jr. is responsible for bringing over like John Dee's works and, signing things with the Monas Hieroglyphica and starting the like early industrial production in America. I feel like these were all like tied together. If you go back to the Elizabethan times, if anything, I don't just want a sequel to, if I could have had a volume 2 to this. We follow it like covering into the revolution, I think would be really cool. But I feel like I could write the one that leads into this, sort of something like 1530 to 1630. Like there's a whole other side to it, or you can go even further back to like Wat Tyler and some of the early peasant rebellions and things. I feel like this sort of under this network of history is like something that like we have to put together in order to like become worthy of having a conspiracy for the good to reestablish a republic in America. Right now, we don't even have like a general or a widely proliferated cosmology of history in which these things are possible. So like, I feel like that's the sort of a position we're in right now in the 21st century, is that we're finally able to like coordinate all of this information, because so much of this book is just like quoting like very like like esoteric documents, like people's like day journals and diaries and things from the time period. And I feel like with those being so hard to track down, like the very process of writing a book like this would have been much harder to do in the time period that H. Graham Lowry was writing in. But these days, most of this stuff is like getting scanned, or a lot of it has been scanned. They're sort of cutting down on our access to institutional resources like this by like paywalling them or through other sort of nefarious means. But we have more of an ability to like connect stuff like this now than ever before.
I think there's great hope for enriching this kind of research and doing much, much more. And in fact, I think you're right. If we don't do that, if there's not a broader movement that's committed to doing so, then we probably will not be able to succeed in any republic building here in the United States, and that might be the deciding factor in the strategic crisis that we find ourselves in. I'd like to, therefore, put on the table what I think are some of the most crucial. Well, let me bring up a crucial idea that is presented by John Winthrop, and that I think if we don't have an appropriate investigation into the nature of freedom today, then there's no possibility, for example, of recruiting people who have a negative idea of freedom presently, whose idea of freedom has decayed or collapsed over the years. This is from the book. This is from 1645 on Christian liberty. Winthrop says, there is a twofold liberty, natural, and I mean as our nature is now corrupt, and civil or federal. The first is common to man with beasts and other creatures. It is a liberty to evil as well as to good, and cannot endure the least restraint of the most just authority. The exercise and maintaining of this liberty makes men grow more evil, and in time to be worse than brute beasts. This is that great enemy of truth and peace, that wild beast, which all the ordinances of God are bent against, to restrain and subdue it. The other kind of liberty I call civil or federal. It may also be termed moral, in reference to the covenant between God and man in the moral law, and the political covenants and constitutions amongst men themselves. And it is a liberty to do that only which is good, just, and honest. This liberty you are to stand for, with the hazard not just of your goods, but of your lives, if need be.
Yeah, I was actually gonna intro the show by reading that like later on. I was gonna record that, but now I don't have to. So thanks for. Yeah, I thought that I think that those that differentiation in like what is termed liberty is like a huge oversight in the way that most people are interpreting these like early American Republican groups. Is they think of like that like these Puritans were like libertines or in some way, or that like this the state we're in America now is like baked into the premises of these early founders. But I totally disagree, obviously, and I would agree that this is like the more proper way of understanding what liberty is, or like what it means to this tradition and in our own like English language tradition. And I mean, it even goes so far as to like people have a problem. I think American libertarians have a problem with Hegel because they can see this sort of idea where it's like the freedom to do what is like profitable, i.e. like what is good for all. They would consider this to be some sort of like moral totalitarianism, right? And they're like, well, they can only understand the concept of like individual liberties in the sense of like one's own individual sense of what a civil liberty ought to be, you know?
Yeah, it's a freedom of the anarchist. It's the freedom who says love to do what you want, as opposed
do what
to,
thou wilt.
Yeah,
very like Crowleyan, like thelemic type of liberty. And this is like clearly not real liberty. You know, this is like to these people to say that is like this is the same thing as slavery, is to just like be completely subjected to like your perverted wills.
I agree. Which, I mean, some of the more interesting things I'm always struck by looking at the case of Bernard Mandeville and the fable of the bees, which comes up in the book as one of the corrupting, intentionally, the operations coming out of London at the time of early young Franklin. But there was an incredibly evil effort to try to assert that it is for the benefit of the public that the state sanctions private vices. It's the most productive thing for humanity is if you let everyone do whatever the hell they want. and you ignore the notion of the common good. And that
Yeah.
is, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the history of like the like English revolutions is almost like completely lost, right? So it's like the context of this being like you have the Puritan like Commonwealth men, like these sort of Republicans who supported Cromwell, and like even earlier being closer to like the Tudors than the Stuarts. They lose to the restoration of the Cavaliers, who are who the very term libertine like refers to in the first place is someone like John Wilmot, or these other Cavaliers who were like they were like arch hedonists, and they were like pagans, and they were like very explicitly this way. And that's why it's sort of funny, because like that's not, people don't think that this was like there was like this sort of tolerance of excess, or you could possibly say, in the Cavalier court. But they were like, they were on some wild stuff. They were like, they were having orgies. They were really into like the early like drug trade and all of this stuff. It's really not that different from today in any way. Like that's where these things are tolerated most, is if you have a ton of capital, you can effectively get away with anything. Or, if you're in the peerage, you have your titles and you're like a spiritual noble, so you can sort of transgress the like law for the commoners or something like that. That's like what, like how a Jeffrey Epstein type figure is sort of like this sort of a cavalier like upstart. It's something we see like all the time still, and I think it ties perfectly into like this long war between like the Puritans and the Cavaliers.
I mean, if we can revive the idea of the common good and the common welfare, then we might be able to challenge the hedonism that is so, that turns Redditors into Ukrainian soldiers on behalf.
I agree, but I think that the real origin of like how it's come to this point, because like this wasn't something like, it was still more like occulted back in like the 17th century, like 18th century. A lot of these like vices and things were sort of they were like insinuated at, but they weren't even in like the public domain yet. For instance, like to have like an opium problem or something, to be doing like tinctures of opium, that took a long time for that to trickle down into like normative possibilities. Like, it wasn't something that like the average peasant could get their hands on, or they didn't have the ability to like go to like the Hellfire Club or something like that. Right. Like these were still like sorted out. But I think that that we've had like a mass democratization of these sorts of things. This is something Wyndham Lewis writes a lot about regarding Nietzsche, is that there's sort of been a democratization of Nietzsche, where you have like everyone now considers themselves a sort of like Nietzschean aristocrat, or like and like you can see this developed by someone like Ayn Rand, where like this is an undercurrent to the libertarianism in America, which is this idea of the soul, like everyone is an aristocrat and a law unto themselves, and they get to make their own law. And that's what freedom is like this ultimate individualist nihilism. And I think that the problem is that there's a lot going for that, right? Like it promises you. I had this debate with an occultist who lives in Amsterdam now on YouTube a while ago, but he was talking about how this sort of literature was liberating to him, because it allowed him to eliminate a lot of the like shame and guilt he had from his like Christian upbringing. So this is something that people do want to rid themselves of, is this like shame and guilt they have for basically being born complicit into this world of like hyper pornography and drug consumption and things like this. I mean, frankly, we're just in a state of bedlam, as anyone in like former times would have it. But what, like, then to like, I posted this before on Twitter. I was like, what is more important, like universal health care or unlimited gay sex? And this is a question that you can't even pose as like possibly being antagonistic towards each other. Like this idea of like that you have to have some sort of restraint on your desires, that this is itself like part of the common good, is restraining your private interests to some degree for the common good. This is considered oppression now. Like to even suggest that like, you shouldn't just do whatever you want all the time. This is like, this is one of the worst things you can tell someone these days. Because kind of in another perverse factor of all of this is that they don't have enough resources to be able to do the things that they would normatively want to do anyway. So it feels to them like you're trying to take away like their outlet.
Well, I think that also some of these authors give a very specific idea of what they consider to be allowable to be considered as self-interest. I mean, Ayn Rand, for example, I think she would scoff at the idea that anybody might actually have an interest in doing the good, or that she would say this still comes down inherently to the same sort of selfishness with which someone might pursue, a drug addiction or what have you. Like Jeremy Bentham with his philosophic calculus, for example, this idea of, adding up all the different pleasures for various ways of running a society. The pleasures are very much in the low level of the kinds of pleasures an animal might enjoy, without, an idea of one's self-interest being in actually doing the good. In other words, like what somebody might think their self-interest is, well, you can, of course, be wrong about that and pursue an idea of your own self-interest that is not actually in your immortal self-interest as a person who could contribute in a durable way to humanity. And I think that that's, as I see it, ruled out of bounds almost with this definition of self-interest that is of a very limited and base sort.
Well, it comes down even more so to a very delimited and understanding the self, or like, of like the subjectivity of like the person. Yeah. It doesn't acknowledge that there's actually like a social role that any individual plays, that, you don't get to have an identity in like isolation from the rest of the world, or you don't even really exist or possibly feasibly as a self-conscious entity to yourself. If you're like in total isolation from a social environment, like if you like never used language and you lived out like, a caveman or something in this perspective worldview, then like, are you even a human being in that sense? Like if you don't have any real social relations with any other human being, like, is that a human being? Is that like, what is that?
Yeah, or to what extent have you been able to encounter what you could be? I mean, people sometimes identify with their current beliefs or current desires and lose sense of what you could be, or what you could be in the process of becoming and improving.
Yeah, this is why I think we have a sort of definition of identity now, which is like you are what you eat, or like you are what you consume. And so like this our only like mediation of identity is not in the sense of like what project are you like involved in with like a community of people, but like what do you buy? Like what things do you purchase? And pretty much everything is understood in this sense. And there's like this idea that you should be able to buy pretty much whatever you want. And this is like how people are understanding this sort of like, this conception of liberty is like, well, why shouldn't I be able to buy this type of pornography or something? Like that's how the question is being presented. There's not even like the notion of really of a societal project that like we're all involved in, like say the reproduction of American society, that like we're all a part of that, like we're all like a part of the same project. That's not understood at all.
It's part of the free market, right? It's freedom of the free market. It's a freedom of the various, British East India Company and so forth companies to loot and to rape and to pillage and take whatever the hell they want. And
yeah, well, I mean that's what's promised though. Like that's like what people are looking for in a certain respect, because like frankly that's how you ascend in this society. Like right now they're pushing like a lot of like Web3 apps and coding. Like that's like the big push right now, is to get a bunch of people involved in this. And the reason why is because it is like, well, listen, we just invented a new place, we invented like a new world, right, in this sort of like new Web3 architecture, and you can go and claim your space on it, and then you can like extract rents from it, and you can be just like, the Silicon Valley wave, or like the wave before that, where like that's what we understand to be our sort of democratic, quote unquote, gift to people is this opportunity. So we're giving them opportunity on a new world to like colonize, and that's basically like what people understand to be like the positive libertarian aspect of America is this this perpetual like colonization. So now we can colonize Web3, and it's like, and you can go put your flag down, and then when everyone's on Web3, you'll own a lot of Web3 territory, and you can extract rents on that territory, and then be an oligarch.
Yeah, I do think. I mean, what you're describing, of course, is just the continual blowing of bubbles, because
of course,
right, because there's the mission, or whatever notion of colonize in the sense that you're using it is explicitly virtual, has nothing to do with improving conditions of life of the population, is divorced thoroughly from the Commonwealth. And I mean, I hope that we can. What we need to somehow bring to people is a kind of a vision or a lens through which they can look out at the middle part of the country, for example, and they can see dozens of new cities. They can see the biggest water project in the history of mankind. They can imagine what could be done, which is extremely difficult right now because we've had 3 generations of degeneration at least, and people are, people younger than 50 have never even sniffed a real economy. They've only seen collapse.
Yeah, I mean, we haven't had a real economy in a century or something. So I mean, like it's not really that much of a like, you could say it's this blowing of bubbles perpetually, but they're also like bubbles that if you make a big enough bubble, then there's stuff built on top of your bubble there, and now your bubble is going to be protected by the state. So look at all these banks, all these insane financial instruments they invent or whatever, and then these things are just like pure speculative bubbles. But then if they pop, it becomes like a concern for the public good. And so what does our state do is we bail it out. Like we just we let them keep going. And that's so there's really effectively no end to that until it ends, right? It will all just collapse on itself.
Yeah, and aren't we at a certain
we're living in it?
Yeah, because
we're living in it.
So. Now that the United States takes people's dollar reserves, then no one can keep their reserves in dollars. That's it. It's over, and that corner has been turned.
Well, the thing is that they're going all in on the lithium standards, now that the petrodollar is dead. So they're trying to dominate the cryptocurrency exchange is what the current frontier of American imperialism is, which is why you see Ukraine is also a big part of this this program, because it's there are so many stories about Ukrainians accepting Bitcoin or other cryptocurrencies in their donations. So we're effectively saying we can now crowdfund armed conflict through cryptocurrencies. And so then it's is this even it's completely laundered the sort of black ops part of this clandestine funding, because now it's washed in hundreds of thousands perhaps of voluntary donations on the part of Redditors with their Bitcoin wallet.
It is, but there's an end to that too, right? I mean, I hear what you're saying, and I'm sure that is the kind of thing that's happening. And my view is that this change that's happening, the motion from Russia and China in complete strategic partnership to push for a new international security architecture, that and development system, that effort, that mission coming from that side of the world is what gives me hope, because the whole process that we're in, it physically cannot continue. I'm not sure when it's going to stop, but it physically can't end in anything other than collapse, because you've had the looting and the raping of the capability for the reproduction of society in the fundamental physical economy of the United States and Europe. And we're seeing the effects of that now. So as it persists, as this process continues, eventually the music stops playing. And it's in that circumstance that, it's in that process that we have to find our own historical role. That's my view. As individuals, we have to figure out, well, what does it mean for me that I'm living in a period of epochal change, and what is it that I'm going to do about it? And it's my, as I said in my comments at the CPI conference, there are solution concepts which are actually clearly indicated if you go back to the Puritans, if you go back to the Winthrops, if you go back even to the Pilgrims. There's a method of increasing the creative power of your society, and it requires an actual devotion to the common good, and then an unfolding of what that might be. First of all, economic sovereignty, you get repeatedly throughout this book, has to do with the ability to control your own economy in order to increase willfully the productive output, like the Saugus Ironworks that were so remarkably effective, much more so than anything going on in Britain. And that kind of control over the economy, I don't know where we get from here to there, how we get from here to there. In a certain
you need
sense,
a revolution, literally.
Go on, yeah.
I think we had a little bit of a debate on this, but I
Yes.
think that the only real way out for America at this point, right, is like this sort of collapse, and it won't be something that is like very nice to live through or experience. And I do think it's like, coming in this century, like this is like the struggle of the 21st century will be like a century of humiliation for the sort of NATO aligned powers, because there's like what we're seeing now is as this empire is getting whisked off the stage of history, it's going to like turn itself inward and be more punitive and controlling of its own citizenry and its own subjects as this like historical inevitability unfolds. So like I think we're at the beginning right now of we just had the years of lockdowns, right? But I'm seeing, I honestly think we're going to have more of this, and we're going to have like an extensive securitization domestically. I mean, we just passed a police bill, like a budget, where the federal police now are more well funded than the entire Russian army. So and that's going to be deployed domestically because things are getting bad, and there's going to be enough pressure for there to be resistance movements and various other things. But the thing they're betting on here is that their technology for social engineering and surveillance has got to the point where they can essentially mitigate this threat by having a constantly managed like state of anarchy. And I mean, we've already been in that since like the 70s. So the question really is like, have they gotten so much better at this that it could be effectively managed for like another 40 years?
I think that the other side of it is the risk of not going down with only these internal repressions that you're speaking or turning inward, but lashing out. I mean, we have a real threat of the Ukraine situation going, whether by intent or through accident that is set up more easily to happen by the circumstances, into a general war, what could become nuclear war. So, I mean, as this collapse is occurring, it's not one that's what's driven, for example, the New Deal, the Green New Deal, rather. And that's what's driven the last 10 years, let's say 11 years since Libya, Syria, targeting Russia, the intent both to enforce an austerity on domestic populations, but really internationally by trying to cajole or force or bribe the nations of Africa, China, India, Russia into green policies that will prevent their development, lower their potential populations, as well as the drive towards war with Russia and with China to militarily prevent and attack the sovereignty of those nations. So I think that's just the other side of this, is the enormous threat of things exploding in an attempt to try to play chicken in a certain way. And
of course, yeah, I'm sort of less afraid of that, because I don't really believe that if as soon as this started to like manifest itself as a reality, like let's say like we actually tried to impose a no-fly zone over Ukraine, and that escalated very swiftly, even to like the point of, let's say there was like limited nuclear exchange or something like that. I don't think that we're in a power dynamic of like the 20th century where there's only this like unipolar power of the United States who's essentially policing everything. I think that the major countries across the world who aren't like, essentially subject to NATO would pretty much come together to call for a cease of like hostilities here. I think that like in this sense, the UN is slowly going to be less a vehicle of American unipolar hegemony, and it's going to become more and more it's going to be run by China pretty soon. The UN, like the way that the security board and these various things, I think that they're slowly going to maybe really all at once at a certain point are just going to shift towards seeing China as the like global leader here. But what I see as the problem with that is that like we're then going to see like what the real fascism of America will be when it starts to, become a pariah state unto itself and is like withdrawing from all of these sort of international agreements under ostensibly nationalist like goals. Like, you can't tell us like that we can't like nuke Russia or whatever because, we're a sovereign nation and we're not subject to the like ordinances of the UN or something like that. I see something more like that as being the possibility. Because like Americans generally are skeptical of these international organizations for a pretty good reason. But I think that skepticism will also be weaponized as America is in its decline.
Well, it certainly has been in the sense that, people have not considered that what this world is shaping up to be is the kind of thing that Larouche was calling for since the 1990s, a four-power agreement. That you have right now India, which is one of the most vocal in resisting the green policy at the COP26 event. They said the dictate was you have to have a 2050 target date for net zero. And they said, no, we're going to do 2070. They said we're going to increase the use of coal until at least 2040, and so on. China said something similar. I mean, not it's different dates, similar intention. And now you have India making agreements with Russia in rupees and rubles, and that's not going to slow down. So I do think that there are people. I don't have the same presumption, or I don't mean to put it exactly like that, but I have a hope, and I think it's a hope based on reason, as looking especially at Graham Lowry's work, that it is possible to change course. And it may be that a lot of what happens is that you have a call from, sort of as you're indicating, a call from developing nations around the world to say we have to reverse this march towards famine, because as the food crisis worsens, people will have to deal with the reality that hundreds of millions of people could die and will die unless we change this and we massively increase food production in the world. And the question is there sufficient emphasis from these various nations to say we need a new system that people in the United States who are closer to sane would be willing to take drastic action to change course?
It's a nice hope. I would agree that that's something to hope for, but I don't really, I believe that we're in a polity that likes to learn everything the hard way. So I don't really know how you could because this is like a question of like education and pedagogy then, right? Where we're but we're in like the most psychologically, like socially engineered population, probably in the entirety of human history. And I don't know if you can just like move away from that within one lifetime or one generation. Like, I think that just as many generations, maybe even twice as many generations as it takes to destroy a republic, it takes to rebuild it. So I would say there is hope for the world and for the people of the world that this American-led unipolar like dollar empire is collapsing as we speak. Like every day, we just learn more and more about its inevitable collapse. However, there's like this is not going. This is going to be taken up by people for social engineering purposes, obviously. So the question is like, how are we going to educate enough people fast enough for this to for that education to preempt the inevitable fall into this like collapse? Like we're gonna have like really bad times in America over the next 50 years, let's say. I don't see life getting better for people in America in the next 50 years. If anything, I see the exact opposite, and the plans are generally to make life worse for everyone for the next 50 years.
In a certain sense, it's just that I think it's much worse than what you're saying in the following way. I think that the kind of circumstance where you have people not able to go to the ATM and pull money out, the kind of circumstance where you have large-scale starvation, people starving to death in the United States, that kind of circumstance is a lot closer than anyone is really acknowledging right now, because the fragility of this transatlantic British imperial, Anglo-American imperial system is a lot greater than anyone is willing to acknowledge at the moment. And it's from that standpoint that I also feel hope, because the closer that we get to a total breakdown and the more and more clear it becomes to people that it is systemic in such way that it can lead to a horror beyond your belief, the increasing capability, I think, not of the masses, I'm not relying on them generally, but the increasing capability there is for people who actually think about the future and understand the way that the future is real, the fact that it unfolds according to actions that we take today, those people are more likely to understand what's happening. And I'm partly encouraged that this is the case because I see it happening around us. I do see that there's an increasing recognition of a potential for a solution. I see it in the CPI conference. My whole outlook at the CPI conference was that, and Jason was there too, so we were both there, is that there is a political tendency in the United States that can respond to the proposals of Russia and China. China calling for the U.S. to join the Belt and Road Initiative, Russia demanding new security architecture. I think that there is a capability to respond to that. It's not enough for a budding political tendency to respond, but it's the right thing, and it would make an enormous difference. That's my view.
I mostly agree. If you look, there's been a lot of studies already showing correlating people's opinions on the Ukraine crisis with how many vaccines they've gotten in the last 2 years. So you'll obviously, it's pretty highly correlated that the people who didn't get any vaccines are the ones who are least interested in establishing a no-fly zone or in sending troops or armaments over to the Azov battalion. However, the more vaccines you had, there's like the people who are single, double, or triple plus vaccinated with boosters and whatnot. That actually correlates directly with how much they want to establish a no-fly zone in Ukraine. So that's what I mean by the question is one of like how effective the social engineering is. That is like what the true that's what our whole system is built on, right? Like if everyone loses confidence in the system, if people stop believing these things, or they lose the fundamental confidence in the society, then that's like the collapse of the economy itself. So what we're in is like a crisis of confidence, and it's being manufactured in a very new way. Like we're fully into like lockdown surveillance mode. Like the early days of the internet, where this was still like a frontier, where it was like, how is the internet going to be governed? When those things were in question, things were a little bit different when it came to like the proliferation of information like this. You used to be able to watch someone like Alex Jones on YouTube, the entirety of everything he's ever done very easily. You could watch pretty much anything. But we've locked down information and the conduits for this information on the whole like disinformation push the 2010s. And I think that it's actually worked. I think that it's actually done a pretty amazing job of reorienting or re-imbuing a bunch of Americans with confidence in the system. Even if it's completely unearned and it makes no sense for them to have confidence in this system, they've been thoroughly engineered to maintain their confidence.
I think you've raised the crucial question. Jason, please go ahead, but I want to state what I think the crucial question is first, which is just that, how, given the fact that things are so bad and that people have degenerated so much in their cultural capability and their moral capability in the United States and Europe, how do you change that rapidly enough to prevent the worst from happening? What do you think, Jason?
Well, I was just going to say, looking back at how the nation was won, I mean, these are not changes that are driven by large groups of people or enormous groups of the populace. I mean, conspiracies are run and developed and won by relatively smaller groups. I'd consider the American Revolution such a successful conspiracy, not entirely a secret one, of course, but it was organized by a relatively small number of people. I don't think that in other words, if we're looking at what our situation is right now, what our prospects are right now, I look at how do people respond to challenges when we go out in public and talk to people, or when you challenge people online or what have you. When you talk to people, how are people able to respond to a challenge to their viewpoints, to paradoxes in their thinking? And I think things like the CPI conference, discussions there, the effective work that the Schiller Institute, that the Larouche movement's been doing in terms of doing outreach, talking to people, building that conspiracy, building that driver. That's where I look in terms of, are we going to have because you might say, well, okay, when things get bad enough, I'm not saying you're saying this, but it's commonly believed that if things get bad enough, then people will change, which of course isn't true. People can just tolerate dark ages. People can just tolerate worsening conditions, as we have done over the past couple of decades, without necessarily doing anything about it. So I think it's in building that.
Well, I think people did try to do things about it. That's the thing, is that I don't think that people haven't been doing things about it. At least my entire life, and the generation before mine, there were tons of people who were trying to do things about it. And there was actually a much larger, I think, coalition of an anti-imperialist movement across various factions. Or you could look at something like the Black Panthers or various other movements of the late 60s and 70s. You could look at Ron Paul. Ron Paul's attempt to do a drawdown on NATO and these sorts of things. Even Donald Trump saying that he wants to get out of NATO. These all have a very large popular support. You could look at the truckers, right? These things are happening, but for some reason, I feel as if these coalitions and the power of this sort of countercultural tendency to create anti-imperialist conspiracies, or to proliferate this type of information or literature the way that the Schiller Institute does, that they've actually been completely routed. I think that is what happened in the 2010s, is that it was this sort of lockdown to preemptively destroy the ability of movements like this to organize themselves on the internet, because now we're all stuck in these cordoned spaces on the internet, which are thoroughly surveilled. I mean, where do you think if someone at the FBI or something is suggesting that we are political extremists who are calling for a revolution in America or something, they have all of that. They have this entire log right now, and we've given them all the information they need for their ability to get a warrant or to tap us in various other ways for just saying the things that we've said right here, because we can't meet up without using these sorts of things. We can look at in How the Nation Was Won, all these sort of literary networks and the Republic of Letters, but these are also working on these sort of clandestine or frontier type of media proliferation. You had illegal presses and things printing things, and you had courier networks for letters and various other things like this, so that you could effectively establish an independent platform to publish and conspire in this sense. And I think that the ability to do that is what has been locked down the most in the last like decade.
Well, the main I can't really argue with the specifics of what you're stating, but the main like response that I have in terms of why I don't think that that's the fundamental question ahead of us is simply that we see what China has done. We see what Russia has done, and many other nations. The way that the Belt and Road Initiative has spread so massively across the world has given people a tremendous hope. And it's changed entirely the climate in places like Africa, which you saw, right?
Absolutely. But like all of these countries have a lot to gain from sort of, why wouldn't they? I have a lot of hope for, say, like Latin America, Africa, a lot of these places that have sort of missed out on the abundance of the 20th century, or these industrial revolutions. I think that they're the ones who are going to be gaining the most as this happens. But it's going to come at the expense of what Americans will perceive to be their own quality of life. They will see it as a zero-sum game, and they will demand degrowth on these economies specifically in order to maintain what they consider to be the American quality of life. This is obviously a false choice, but you can see how it's pretty easily presented to people. I mean, this is what most people generally believe, right? They believe that the reason why China has ascended is because they quote unquote stole all of our jobs. And this narrative is already it's already nascent. It's that's where a lot of people are being inducted into, and it makes it gives the world meaning to them in these frames, right? Because then you can just explain everything as this sort of international communist conspiracy where somehow the CIA are best friends with Xi Jinping, and they're trying to just debase the Americas in order to put them into a Chinese surveillance slave network. This is literally what people believe, though. This, I have to do so much work on a day-to-day basis talking to anyone about China to correct all of this disinformation and decades, if not over a century, of psyops regarding what China is, how they do things, what their goals of their society are, etc. We're so thoroughly indoctrinated on this front that the first step, right, is the rectification of names. So we have to educate people. And there's already how do you educate people if you're going to let's say we did a documentary on that was Mao apologetics for Mao Zedong, this is going to be mass reported by anarchists, right? This is hate speech, right? This is this is actually downplaying a genocide or something, according to the new terms and services agreements that have been rolled out during this Ukraine crisis, so that people would be allowed to, say that the Russians deserve what they're getting because they did a Holocaust on the Ukrainians or some nonsense like that. But this is the real contours of the information war and I think that's the real important part. Information war is the beginning, is what economics is founded on, and then when you have a war in reality, that's due to the economic war.
Again, I mean, as it is the case that information is not the truth, then there is reality that's people are bumping up against. I have a somewhat different expectation of how things may develop, partly because I am committed to changing things. I know you are too, but it is my view that this needs to be a rapid development, a rapid change. And what I see is as the lies become too much to bear, and as the condition of life accelerates downward, there is absolutely a kind of an upsurge that you can expect to come. There's something in the American public that allows that. It is not, that's not in question to me, that there's going to be some form of resistance to this. What's at question for me is, will those people have leadership? Because
I mean, that's what it comes down to, right? Because, and then the question ultimately becomes in this leadership, are these people non-instrumentalizable, right? Let's say you have this guy, he's a good speaker, but he's got a lot of blackmail on him, and this is this is the technology that's really been developed, is the ability to reorganize resistance movements, because there's been perpetual resistance movements domestically for decades, obviously, but they get channeled into the system itself through these various mostly through human intelligence work and surveillance and things like this, manipulation of things, getting people into blackmailable positions so that they can then launder their authenticity to the quote unquote movement or whatever, and direct it towards various other channels. That seems to me to be something that's almost down to a science here. It happens all the time. You can see we have a whole industry for the production of what appears to be resistance. I mean, our official narrative is that we're the rebels, right? We're the rebellious empire that's fighting the bad empire.
The authoritarians,
yeah, the authoritarians. And no, but this is a powerful myth, right? Everyone wants to be a rebel in this sense, but that's what's so weird, uniquely weird, historically weird about the prevailing state of American empire, is that everyone who thinks that they're a rebel anarchist who wants to tear down society, they're basically quoting the books that are written by the elites, the oligarchs of the world at their Geneva conventions. They have the exact same worldview. And so it's how did this oligarchic aristocratic vision of the cosmos become so democratized? How is it that everyone now considers themselves to have the eyes of a Malthus or various other Club of Rome, Sierra Club type people? Why is it that everyone kind of normatively thinks in this cosmos now?
I think that it is for lack of classical culture. I am thoroughly convinced of the view that if you want people to become unassailable to the various stratagems of intelligence services to turn them, of course you can never really do that, but never finally do that. But the best way to do that is to have is to connect people to an immortal mission, to one that addresses humanity itself and the development of humanity. I do very much think that the idea of agape, of divine love of truth, love of God, love of mankind, has to be a crucial element of any kind of revolutionary effort in the sense that we mean it, that could actually be successful. And if we're going to accomplish that, it is the case, I think you got to throw out all of the popular culture of the past.
I disagree. See,
120
this is where I'm
years.
going to disagree.
I know. I'm
disagree
glad.
very, very strongly.
Please.
Because this is my general thing that I probably take issue with I've read. I mean, I'm a huge fan of Executive Intelligence Review. Believe me, I've read my fair share of this, and I highly respect the organization as a counterintelligence operation. But I do believe that it has this tendency towards this sort of 19th century bourgeois conceptions of culture, where the classics are how we are to determine what a healthy culture is, or proximity to the Greco-Hellenic sort of modes, or if we go back to classical music or things like this. But I personally, I hold up the sublimity of the Bible, which is not at all in this tradition of Greco-Roman classicism, which I consider to be mostly aristocratic in origin. The Bible is pop culture, is exactly the same as the pop culture that we inhabit today, to this day. I mean, the Bible is not scandalized by man's most base or vulgar aspirations, or his wills. This is what I see as actually the engine behind this. I don't see how you can have any attempt to establish agape in America right now, which isn't somehow tied to let's say hip hop, or these very our major cultural forms as they exist right now. If I look at someone like Kanye West, and I see him actively trying to do this through this very means. So I kind of disagree on the pop cultural front. I think if anything, that's one of the only good things we have going for us, is that we have like such a strong pop culture, like that we have like cultural production in this sense. Obviously there's problems with it, but I think that that is where the hope is in America, is in like people like the poets and like the musicians. Ironically, these are going to be the people who are actually able to like give voice to these concerns to a large enough population. I mean, literally nobody is like Kanye West right now. Kanye West is doing this every single day, and he has a much wider reach than anyone can imagine. Any like of us like political people could imagine.
So I think that at issue is, what are you trying to communicate? Oh, and I see you kind of flickering there, Jason. So I definitely want to hear what you think. But I think what's at issue is what are you trying to communicate, and how is it possible to communicate such a thing? Somehow we're trying to cause people to become aware of something in themselves that already exists, right? We're not going to implant something anew in the population, in ourselves and so forth. We're going to draw out something that is already there. And this is this uniquely human capability of creative thought, of voluntary creative thought, by which the human species separates itself from the beasts. It has to do with what Winthrop is talking about in terms of moral freedom. And it's this, this power to grab hold of universal physical principles and wield them for the good of humanity and do good with them, which we like. That's what I'm talking about in terms of whether the leadership will be competent in this period that lies ahead of us. Because if people do not know how to use physical principles to massively increase the productivity of the United States economy and of the world, then we won't do it. And that could be the deciding line. You might have a bunch of people who say, we're standing up for freedom, we're standing up against this tyranny, but then, they don't accomplish anything. Something like what happened with Trump, for example. So it's in that question of the specific ability to investigate the nature of human creativity per se that I find the necessity of classical music. And I do not say that, it's not that the artists and the poets and so forth of today are not important. It's exactly because they are so important that it seems to me, in terms of potential, that we have to lift the standard of communication to be able to address that specifically. And so sentiment, getting people to feel a particular way, or to admit a particular fact about what's going on in society, it's not enough. There has to be something more than that.
If I can add on that, I wouldn't, for example, consider Negro spirituals to be particularly bourgeois. And I'd also just like to raise that for a revolutionary, radical like Beethoven, this sounds a little defensive of me to say this, but sort of like you need a decent sized lab to do cutting edge science today in many fields. You need some patronage if you're going to pull together an orchestra and a chorus to be able to perform music that you're writing. And unfortunately, given the economic conditions at the time a lot of this was written, people did, they had to seek out patronage of that sort. But I think that the music itself is what should speak for itself.
Oh, I'm a huge fan of all of this stuff. Like, I love classical music. I love all the like 19th century bourgeois stuff I'm talking about still. What I'm saying is this was like what the Soviet Union, like this was like how they envisioned things, right? They were like, we're going to turn all of these factory workers into like little Goethes, and everyone's going to be able to like appreciate ballet, and everyone's going to appreciate ballet. They're going to appreciate chess. They're going to appreciate these sort of like these things that were like high status aristocratic things in the earlier 19th century became rebranded as like the form of like Russian patriotism or like Soviet patriotism, was that like everyone could become like as encultured as like a 19th century British gentleman or something. But I think that I feel like that's partially one of the reasons why the Soviet Union like failed as a cultural like experiment, is because it neglected what America took as its like ultimate product, which was popular culture in the sense of like rock and roll music and things like this. This is what people actually wanted. Like people didn't actually want to everyone. I mean, I can go to a symphony whenever I want. You know, there's symphonies here. They're very well funded by our lovely philanthropists. But that's not what I want. I want to go see Playboi Carti. Like that's what I want to go see. Like he speaks way more to me about like American realities right now, or is like on the vibe of things like this. You know, I see a lot of power in contemporary art that I don't see in like just sort of trying to recreate what was the high art of an earlier time period. That seems to me to be kind of backward. I think really like what you have is the people closest to understanding all of this are the people who are on the cutting edge of contemporary music, which isn't at all the same as putting together a symphony or something like that, because you don't need to put together a symphony. If you have a laptop, you have infinite symphonies at your disposal to chop up and splice however you will, and you can do literally anything.
Yeah,
for free.
On that, I mean, I will say a lot of the, symphonies and things, usually if I go to them, these performances, I often regret it because they're just so badly done. And half of what gets performed is, really trash. It's called classical because, there's people with money like to go see it and it involves a bunch of fancy instruments. But a lot of it's just it's garbage music. It's not actually good. But look, but the other side I wanted to talk about was on science, on having an affirmative movement as opposed to a resistance movement. I mean, of course, you have to resist bad things, but I think there's great power in having an affirmation, and that lacking a understanding from the inside of how science works, of how that creative process works, is what allows people to be fooled by things like the Green New Deal.
Absolutely. But it's worse than that, though, man. It's worse than that, though. We're taught an actual completely like false envision of what science is. And that's what people are indoctrinated in, is like when people use it, like in America, the word science doesn't mean the actual process of like skeptical confrontation with reality and experimentation and like the refinement of experimentation and taking in all this data and just like kind of like endless accumulation and like creative efforts into like figuring out how things work. It means having the right credentials, and because most quote unquote scientists are like working in science factories. They're not really doing lab like work out in the field or doing like unique things. They get trained in like lab protocols, and we have just this giant like factories of scientific like lab work and things like this. I know tons of people who just do lab work all the time, but if you ask them what their day-to-day life is like, they're like a factory worker. They're just as alienated from the ultimate purpose of the research they're doing as, say, a Ford worker was in like making automobiles. In some ways, the Ford worker had a much closer connection to the work that he was doing than someone who works in, let's say, like a biological testing lab for like pharmaceutical company or one of those like hospital service companies. They just are running mass trials on just doing work. Like it's kind of abstracted. They're not producing new knowledge, but they will consider themselves to be scientists because they follow orders, right? They'll identify themselves to you as a scientist, even though they haven't produced any new knowledge.
Well, and then so many of these great breakthroughs that we have available to us, but simply don't take the time generally to learn much about, were not driven by data. I mean, for example, just to take one of the most recent enormous breakthroughs, Einstein, about a little over a century ago, his relativity theory wasn't driven by data. There were paradoxes. Well, there was a minor paradox in understanding Mercury's orbit that it was able to resolve. But it wasn't driven by experimental anomalies. It was driven by a thought experiment and realizing a paradox among different aspects of scientific theory as it existed at the time.
Well, we all know that Edgar Allan Poe really invented relativity long ago. So we can say it was, in fact, the thought experiment called Eureka by Edgar Allan Poe. And, Einstein gets credit for it as part of a new sort of mythology regarding like government funded science as part of the war effort.
I don't follow. Are you? I'm not sure I'm metaphorical you're being. I'm serious. What?
I'm very serious. Have you read Eureka? Edgar Allan Poe's Eureka?
Some years ago. Could you?
Yeah, I mean, pretty much the entire. like not like mathematically disclosing how relativity would function, but the thought experiment that he provides in that book is like the very grounds upon which Einstein, like people who are inspired by this book or, you know, reading this book, were the people that Einstein ultimately gets his ideas from. It's not like he was the singular genius alone who just had this epiphany, but the process of like producing relativity as a scientific hypothesis took place over a much longer period of time, you know? Like most of what Einstein was doing was collating a bunch of other studies that were done or, you know, hypotheses that others had had. Oh God, I wish I could remember, but there's people who like don't get the credit that they probably should deserve for contributing to the theory of relativity.
I mean, let me make a broader point, but also, I mean, I don't think that Poe was confronted by a contradiction between how an electromagnetic wave propagates, but you know, but again, but getting to your earlier thing about science being driven by data and then driving new experiments to, you know, further interrogate the data. I guess my point is there that both what Einstein had done there, what Fermat did with discovering that light moves in the least time. I mean, it wasn't, his idea didn't come, there of course was a problem that people hadn't figured out how light refracts, but his idea didn't match the data, so to speak. It came from more of what you would say a first principle, or you know, a final cause rather than an efficient cause. So I think that that's just a lot of, or like Kepler, when he figured out how the planets moved, you know, he of course had a lot of great data from Tycho Brahe, and that was an enormous benefit to him, and he couldn't have done what he did without it. But he definitely didn't curve fit and come up with an ellipse. I mean, he arrived at an ellipse as a shape only as a result of two interacting forces that he considered causing the planet to go around the sun based on its distance, and a second force that caused the planet to come closer and to recede from the sun, and that these things combined did end up creating an ellipse, but it was a dynamic shape. It wasn't the curve fitting that it's often portrayed as. I mean, he saw it physics. He said, I'm making a hypothesis. I think that my mind can understand how God composed this universe and that there's actually a cause for the motions, not just circles upon circles and the geometric approach of Aristotle and his progeny. Kepler said, I'm going to go step out completely beyond, I'm going to go outside of what people considered to be cause, which was just mathematics. And I'm going to say, no, there has to be some reason that these things are moving. And then he was totally on his own on this, and through tenacious work, you know, he pulled together a physical theory. But it was driven by hypothesizing, I think. And
of course, it's driven by the imagination. The imagination is like the key. That's why I'm saying, like, you know,
not induction.
Oh yeah, no. I'm not saying that. No, when I'm saying like taking in like you know, like refining and like creativity, etc. I'm not meaning in the sense of like having a sort of a black box of like data accumulation here in Silicon Valley, and then having, you know, people mishmash an algorithm to see what kind of data they can pull from it or whatever, and then like refining the algorithm more to have certain outputs. That's not really what I mean. I mean more like the collective process of the like total body of the imagination that's constructed like piece by piece by, you know, everyone all of the time, but most expressed by the great poets and visionaries who have the ability, like, you know, who have the daring to imagine beyond the consensus reality that is imposed on us.
I would say that potential to to discover a real future that does exist, that most people will not see, but that should people respond to it would become reality. That's the kind of thing that is expressed right now in world politics and in the work of Lyndon LaRouche. Because what I find is there is a vision, there's a wholeness in the concept of the world land bridge that grips people. And it's ever more gripping because you see that the Belt and Road Initiative has been begun from that standpoint. How
gripping is it? How gripping is it compared to the opposite? The opposite story that people are mostly enmeshed in is one of escaping to Mars colonization. This is what people are dreaming of in America right now. No one's really heard of the World Land Bridge in America. And if you were to describe it to them, it would be basically meaningless to them because they don't care about trains or public utilities like this, because they don't have them or engage with them, or when they do.
I can assure you that is. I understand why you would presume that to be true, but I can assure you that it is not. That I have spent a lot of time out in public talking to people walking past a post office, and all across the tri-state area, and they do respond to it. They do get the idea.
So you're probably introducing it to them, is what I'm saying.
Okay, well, that's what I think we should be doing, because
I agree. I agree that it's a good project to present out to people in the world. But ironically, have you ever seen Snowpiercer? Because there's kind of the Snowpiercer is like preemptively the anti-World Bridge narrative, right?
Yeah, the Malthusian death train. Yeah.
Yeah. It's kind of a beautiful work of projection, where it's this idea that this train would be like a purposeless project because global warming is going to fuck everything up to the point that the world's going to be a whole like polar ice cap or whatever the hell happens in that movie. I think it's all frozen over in that movie, but it's not too hot, but it got too cold. So like that, I feel like that if you're talking like that's what people are going to think immediately, right? If you're talking about like this like global transit system.
If they've seen that movie, I mean, the thing is that
it's popular.
Yeah, okay, but even then, I don't think it grips the imagination as much because it's fantasy, and what I'm talking about is the future. It's it's your grandchildren's lives, and
but the future is our fantasy right now. Like for us right now in time, people's visions of the future are through fantasy. Like that's how we come to like even have a discourse about what the future could be, is through these sort of collective fantasizing. That's why we have an obsession really with dystopian future stories, right? Like that's like the primary export right now.
I think you probably agree with me that is an intentional cultural policy that is implemented on the people to cause them to think that way. But
of course.
Yeah. Okay. So the question remains: is it the case that this kind of brainwashing, cultural programming, whatever, is sufficiently powerful that it will be impossible to reverse this in a sufficiently short amount of time? I don't think so. I can't. I mean, let me put it another way. If one says to me, we absolutely are going to win, don't worry about it, of course I'm not going to believe that person either. There's a certain potential that exists where I look into the future and I say, well, what is it what is it that might make my life necessary? That might give my life purpose after I'm dead, because I'm going to die. So I got to figure out if I really want to leave something after I'm dead, if I want to be truly human, as I see other people have, then I'm going to have to contribute something that's going to live beyond me. And, and that's where you say, okay, well, then somehow we're going to have to make a change here, or at least fight on the principles that are going to be necessary to accomplish that change. I believe it's possible to do this. If I didn't believe that, then I wouldn't do it. And so there's a certain relationship there.
I agree that it's possible. I agree that it is possible. I don't know if it's exactly probable. For the American, if we're talking specifically about the American population specifically, or like, let's say we could expand that to like the most like NATO of European countries. If that is going to reverse itself specifically in a short enough time period, I am not very bullish on that. I'm pretty bearish on that.
But that depends upon the action of other nations. We are not an island. The presumptions about the unipolar world are just not true, and it is not possible. For example, look at the trade between U.S. and China. The whole fantasy of like Steve Bannon of decoupling is insane. Or look at the craziness of the sanctions against Russia, which are exposing the fragility of the Western financial system. These people are crazy enough to destroy themselves. They aren't letting NATO destroy the world economy. They're doing that. because of course the overarching policy authors are Malthusians who are intentionally trying to bring us into a dark age.
Yeah, and but they also have like bunkers in New Zealand that they're planning on going to when it fucking does hit the fan.
Absolutely.
So like, what happens after that?
I totally agree with that. That's clearly the case. That's how those people think. But their presumptions are that the human mind is a computer and that you can program it however you want. And that's just not true. The human mind is not a computer. The human mind is the realm in which we actually get the idea of an historical identity, like a true human identity. As we're talking about the problem that people don't have one.
What I'm saying is, how strong do you believe that strongly enough that you would subject yourself to prove like the power of the human mind to would you voluntarily undergo, like, let's say, whatever sort of MK Ultra brain conditioning program that they're going through right now? Are you going to volunteer to subject yourself to that?
But isn't that what we've been through? I very much appreciate.
Yeah, we are. We are going through it.
I really appreciate and sympathize with your comments about living on the internet at the age of 13 and 14. I know exactly what you're talking about. Everyone does who did anything like that. And so we have been through that. And we're still here. We're still here. Of course,
but they've got some new shit coming out, buddy. Like, they got some new ideas.
Yeah, but look, I believe in the fundamental goodness of God, and so I know that that every evil, this is Leibniz, right? That every evil is there to prompt us to a greater good. And so I say to myself, okay, things are extraordinarily bad, but on the other hand, there's this guy Cam, and I'm talking to him,
Yeah. I've sort of one thing I never really understood about like Russian revolutionary literature was the power Chernyshevsky had over the prelude to the Russian Revolution, because he his philosophy, he said the worse the better, right? And I thought, how despicable could someone be to believe the worse the better? But I've come around to that. And I think that, like, as far as it is in America, the worse, the better. Like, the worse things are getting, the better things will be ultimately. Because what we're going through right now is, I mean, obviously with each one of these new crises and things getting completely just like mind wiped over and over, there's more and more people who are getting like excreted through that process. Like, you could say perhaps you and I were both like, subjected to this sort of psychological engineering and social engineering on the internet. But we've come out of it being able to see that is what is happening. And that's the case for a bunch of people, more people every year, probably, especially after the fucking COVID shit. But there's also an equal like growing fervor and like dogmatism regarding the people who are defending everything that the establishment does. So like that is like the real like covert, like that's the real shadow information war going on right now. It's fractalized and it exists in like every level of American society, to the point where it's like, I'm much more easily scapegoated. Like it's easier for me to get scapegoated amongst a bunch of like purported leftists and like, liberals and progressive idealists and things for defending, let's say, the flyover anti-vaxxer or whatever. Like I am immediately going to be scapegoated by proxy. However, I've not found the opposite, where I can usually talk to like MAGA people and be like, yeah, I'm a communist and I agree with you. And it goes pretty well. So I think that's like ultimately good, like that all these like that they're unleashing all these like horrific things in a way, because it's obviously going to destroy themselves. But it's not going to be a fun time to be around for this.
I have to say that part of the funny thing is that I've been working with the Larouche movement for 10 years, and I've always dealt with the let me put it another way. I have never spoken to such an engaged and excited audience as I did at CPI. I've spoken at a lot of our events, and we've had wonderful audiences, but the potential and that's just a tiny slice of what is out there and what is growing. And the fact that I could go and talk to people about Larouche, and that you have something like from Caleb, the story that Caleb told is true. When we first met, he called me a fascist and we had a screaming match. And now,
yeah, I thought that was really funny because I could totally see that happening in that context at that time period.
So I get inspired by something like that, because then, I look at people. Of course, the case with Caleb is also important because he knew Ramsey Clark. And we called Ramsey Clark a lot of bad names and attacked a lot of things that he did. And then he was LaRouche's appeals attorney, and he said very strong things in support of LaRouche and saying that the legal attacks on him were the worst that he had ever seen in terms of an effort to destroy a political movement. So, the unexpected in history is the principle of humanity. I think the human reaction that people have, which is stronger than the tendency towards bestiality, basically towards the best state.
I agree. So
However,
let me tell
you
what
have
I'm
to.
saying is
Okay,
unexpected.
okay. Let me add one thing though. You have to figure out a good way to bring out that humanity within people, and that's the topic that I think is most interesting.
I mean, I agree with everything you're saying here, but what I'm saying is that I don't know if like Americans, frankly, like coming together as like a body is going to happen. But number two, I don't know if like we deserve for things to get better. I feel like we've taken a lot of this sort of like oligarchic license to, indulge in private vices at the expense of the public good. This is pretty normal. People are pretty proud and happy with this, even as they're like torturing themselves to death. Like you have like effectively like a whole, you can say they're being manipulated. They know not what they do. And I literally say they know not what they do to myself every single day. But they're like an open revolt against God and the truth. And they bear false witness, and they have like cybernetically engineered false witness production on these sorts of applications. Like there's like a power differential here and a type of social engineering that, like, to even discuss as being a reality, you're tarring yourself as like a schizophrenic crazy person, right? Like the fact that I like even say this, if I say this in mixed company, people will think that will tell me, well, if they could, they would call like the mental health cops on me and have me subjected to antipsychotics because I describe the internet as something that like emerges out of MK Ultra or something like that, right? That's a little kooky.
But they change. People change. People change. I mean, the things that.
So, I agree with you, but I'm saying this is what I say. What I see is in the unexpected in America is that America is going to be saved by South America. Like that. Like I think that North America is like sick and corrupted, and it is trending negatively. However, South America is the land of the future for the great America, like the greater, like. If you want to have that sort of like land bridge you're talking about, then you need like a type of Pan-Americanism, a type of Pan-American solidarity that hasn't existed in a long time. I mean, it existed under false pretenses, under like Woodrow Wilson and other things like this, when we really just wanted to be able to, send our death squads down to Latin America. But I see Latin America as the future. I think that they're the ones who are going to be implementing. I mean, they already are implementing a lot of like the advances that China's made in infrastructure themselves, and they also have the majority of lithium in the world. So, and that's going to be basically the bedrock of the next economy. So, what we're really looking at is a proxy war in Latin America over rare earth minerals and like which regime is going to be more popularly disposed there. Like whether it's China or America. Who would they rather have in charge there? And like, we're going to be cooing governments, and we already have been. And we have like a very complicated relationship with somewhere like Venezuela right now, or like because we want their oil, but obviously we're also trying to coup them. So that's where I see all of this stuff sort of playing out is down there. I think you'll see President AOC build a wall to keep out the Mexican communists.
Let me return back to, you had said you'd asked, are Americans deserving of a better future right now? Or you'd put it some way like that. And I think that, that's a very serious question. In a certain sense, no, of course not. The United States doesn't deserve to survive in its current condition. And that'd be a legitimate way to look at things. In terms of what Americans could be, in terms of what the country could be, does it deserve to be better? Well, yeah, by our human nature, that's true. I think the conflict between those is part of Leibniz's idea that this is the best of all possible worlds.
Yeah, I agree. I'm a Leibnizian man.
Because
if you're, what I'm saying is like Americans, like who are completely like Hylic and immersed in their like sensuous natures here, almost completely proud of becoming bestial as of late. That this is for the best because it's going to like wake people up when all of this shit sort of hits the fan. And these people who've like bestialized themselves are going to be the least likely to inherit the mandate of heaven here. So ultimately, this is like how we're going to have a revolution. We'll have 1776 commence again. Who knows? Maybe it'll be 2076. We'll have a good like 300-year reunion, and that'll work. But I think things are going to have to get a lot worse, like because people don't see it.
The thing is,
people,
a lot
like,
worse might mean the great
it.
nuclear war of 2022, and then there's no 2076. I mean,
I don't think that that's going to. Actually, I don't.
I have faith. Worse.
I have faith that that's not possible. But
you have faith in cybernetic mutually assured destruction, then.
No. I what I'm saying is I lack the faith that these sort of automated, quote unquote, like missile systems and things like this will actually work the way that they're intended. Or, I would expect probably a defection of the military before something like that would happen.
And that's what happened in the past when the systems called for it. I mean, we've had very close calls. And even if you have got the human factor, if you're talking about 6 minutes flight time and your system tells you there's a missile coming your way, there's not a lot of time to think. And it doesn't require cybernetics for a civilization-ending choice to occur. I mean, I just think that the threat...
I mean, what I'm saying is the civilization-ending choice in America has already occurred. Like, the civilization of America is ending as we speak. Like, I don't see a continuity of this system for the next 50 years. Like, do you think we're going to have regular elections for the next 50 years for president?
No.
Yeah, me neither. So, like, I'm saying that we already made like a civilization-ending decision, and we're playing out the consequences of that. But I don't think we're going to have like I don't think I just have faith in the human species, I guess, enough to not believe that we're going to have like massive nuclear exchange and just like mutually assured destruction of the entire globe. I just don't think that people would actually do that when push comes to shove. Like, I think things would just like, sort of splinter or fall apart. Like the act of like trying to make that happen would cause everything to fall apart.
A lot of those decisions are not made by people, they're made by artificial intelligence. So, I mean,
there's no such thing as artificial intelligence.
Well, you and I would agree on that. But in other words, it's a program it's already been set to go.
No, but someone has to press the button.
Okay, we can disagree on that. But although I really think that there's this, I agree with Jason. There's a very sincere possibility of things going awry, and the exact way that they would go awry is that it would happen accidentally. However, okay, what is underlying this question again is, what is the principle that we can devote ourselves to that we actually need to educate people for? You have stated that you think it'll take us perhaps until 2076, but to do what? What is it that we're actually trying to, cause people to recognize about themselves, or what are the principles that we're asking them to figure out?
I would say we just really there's really not that much that needs to be done to completely transform America into like a very dynamic and good place to live. It's just that those things would require an armed revolution to have. For instance, let's say we wanted to nationalize all of the oil and gas in America. Do you think that we could do that through legislation?
I'm not really sure how to answer that. Go on.
Like let's say even like we had a movement. Somehow we got people elected to a position where like maybe they start out in the Senate, popular firebrand orator who's just demanding nothing. The one plank in the platform. We're just solely going to nationalize all the oil and gas in America. Do you think this man would last very long?
I hear you, but see, these hypotheticals, they don't do it for me, because I mean, I know how these things work, because I knew Larouche, and he went to jail. He was put in prison, and my friend Mike Bellington was given 77 years of a sentence, and he served 11 of them. So I know something about this, but that that doesn't mean that things haven't changed, because of course Larouche was put in prison, but the Chinese adopted his policy.
The Chinese adopted it. Isn't that interesting, though, right? Like, Larouche's largest influence has been not domestically. Like, domestically, actually, the like talking about LaRouche, like, that's cringe. Like, it's weird. Like, people give me a lot of shit actually all the time.
I know.
For talking about LaRouche type stuff. But like, how, like, you're gonna undo all of that? You're gonna undo, like, when people Google the name and they go up to like the Wikipedia,
Sure.
etc. Like, how are you gonna, how do you route around this complete like informational control?
Well, I just don't. I'm interested in the truth because I believe that the truth has a power that is greater than any lie, and so I'm pursuing it. And I may be one of those people who dies and is never remembered, and I wouldn't mind if that's the case if I pursued truth, and if I
think that's
for
very, no, I'm not trying to harsh you for that, because I feel the exact same way, and I think that's like a very admirable thing. But what I'm saying is, like, if we're going to be like very like pragmatic and like serious about this, how much is it worth to like commit your martyrdom like within America, kind of like, when you could just go somewhere else and help produce things there, right?
How much are people worth?
I mean, I love America, and it breaks my heart every day. Like, and I don't know if America loves me. Like, that's more where I'm at.
The future generations will.
Oh yeah, no, they will. But like, I've always considered my work to be like, my ideal reader is like reading the satirical literature of the late American Empire in a Chinese translation. Like, I don't see things turning around here in my own lifetime, and I'm trying to get out, frankly.
I know you are, and I wish you wouldn't. I wish you would stay, and perhaps you will. But okay, I think that it's necessary to get back to the Bacon question, because and the things that follow from that. Okay, because it is my essential view that what's gives me the courage to act in this way, or my faith that it will function, has to do with what I have gained in terms of Larouche's discoveries on the intelligibility of human creativity. And what I'm talking about is the fact that it is possible to willfully increase the creative potential of your society, of your, of yourself, of the people around you, that it is possible to do that, to make them more knowingly human, more knowingly able to wield certain principles, and for the good of humanity, for the good of the world. And I believe that that's something that is not available in empiricism. And I realize that your view of Bacon is different from mine. So I want to hear about it.
Well, so what do you think the invisible college is? Like, what is this project that Francis Bacon is allied to, like this Rosicrucian college? Like, what is that, if not what you're describing itself? Like, it was this institution they were going to create in order to like raise the creative potentialities and intellectual potentialities of the population, in order to defeat which was at the time the hegemonic empire of the Spanish. I don't think he was really an empiricist in that sense. You get a sort of later like Baconian orthodoxy taken up by the sort of Masons and their interpretation of like Francis Bacon and the Rosicrucian phenomenon itself. But I think Francis Bacon was allied with like Edward de Vere, and this was their collective project in Tudor England. Like, this is where Shakespeare comes from. This was the whole goal. This is why they had so much investment in the arts and sciences under Queen Elizabeth.
We share an appreciation for the Tudor England, and there are various specifics that we could get into, but my focus would be what is it that Bacon actually accomplished? What is it that he was trying to do? What is it that this project was intended to accomplish? And where did that scientific power go? What did it lead to?
It went right here. This is what built America.
What discoveries came from Bacon?
The discovery that knowledge is power, my friend.
That's not enough for me.
They're the same thing. They're the same thing. No, but this was like Francis Bacon was like, he would like a lot of this stuff, right? Like, this is like one thing I see in like Larouchean literature generally, is that a lot of this stuff was developed for the good at the time, and like because you had like Bacon was like working in like frankly like an anti-imperialist structure because they were trying to like cast off the yoke of the Vatican and the like black nobility and like the Habsburg empires and things like this, and they were like fighting for like liberty of conscience and like collecting like using the nation's resources to develop industry. Like frankly, like this is like taken for granted now, but like where did this come from? It comes from there. I mean, what else? Francis Bacon giving the origin of modernity to Chinese inventions coming across on the Silk Road. I think that was a pretty astounding discovery of Francis Bacon to have, or at least an insight that almost no one else in his time had.
I'm going to continue to learn more about your perspective on this, but what I find is that the Bacon that I have read, it demonstrates that he is aligns himself with the idea that the only way for an empire, for example, to succeed is by keeping down other powers. He was. What is that about? I also find
that's him talking about the French and the Spanish trying to keep down the English.
Mm-hmm. Well, okay. We can go. Geez, it's hard to approach this.
This is the thing, because Francis Bacon, he was a very guarded man, right? Like because he was under a lot of pressure. He was under a lot of surveillance. So really, there's like the aphorisms, but like Francis Bacon's project is like an esoteric project. Like you're not supposed to just like take his words as their literal meanings there, but he's writing in a style that's supposed to like it's sort of like Wittgenstein later takes up this style, where a lot of the aphorisms are like in contradiction with each other. You're supposed to like espy these contradictions and these other things. And that is like part of the educational process of reading Francis Bacon, is realizing that he means something more than he can express in words, because he's literally like being surveilled, and like he's in a very difficult position because he's not exactly an Anglican, but he also can't give too much to the nonconformists and the dissenters because he has a position of power. And so he has to mediate all of these contradictions that are unfolding in Tudor England. And he has to do so by writing things that are like basically generally agreeable aphorisms, but like the esoteric like context of these aphorisms and the actual like life project that he was involved in was all like of the utmost had the utmost secrecy around it.
Well, I am looking forward to your book on that, because I need to have it laid out in front of me, since it is esoteric, as you say, to understand what it is that you're referring to.
I mean, it's like how do you think so many quotes of Francis Bacon end up in Shakespeare?
I'm not sure. What do you think?
Oh, it's because they were friends. The De Vere family and the Bacon family were like aligned. Like their fathers were friends. They even had some like intermarriage across the wider of those two families. They had the same coat of arms. They both had pigs on their coat of arms, of course.
Okay, I can point. Actually, Jason, if you want to speak up, please don't let me interrupt you.
Well, I mean, I do appreciate hearing this historical aspect of Bacon. I mean, as far as I've been acquainted with him, it's generally through what's presented as his scientific breakthrough, which was that you should use observations, which wasn't, new to him. And I'd said earlier what I thought about.
He's really more of a hermeneutician, I think. I think that's like the problem with the later, like they had to construct the scientific canon when they were like working with Newton against Leibniz, etc. But like truthfully, Bacon is much closer to Leibniz than he is to Newton, in my opinion.
I guess I can just say that scientifically, like in recreating the history of science, which I think anybody who really wants to get into economics must do, he just doesn't really appear. I mean, that's what I could say about it.
Yeah,
I mean,
I think that makes sense though. That makes sense because I think that he's really more of a hermeneutician, and he's actually more concerned with questions of like the organization of societies and churches and like knowledge building institutions. That's like much more what he's interested in than in the actual process of like like the generation itself of like experimental knowledge or like performing experiments. He wasn't really so much interested in doing that. He was more concerned with like how should universities operate, right? Like, which is like basically the nexus of all of these different things. Like, you know, you have religious questions, you also have scientific questions, and you have cultural questions regarding like, you know, the production of culture, all in the same place. So like he's interested in this type of question.
This might be something interesting to look at a comparison with Colbert, who Larouche points to in terms of, I mean, because Colbert brought together scientists from across the continent to Paris. He set up the Scientific Academy. He was extremely big on organizing the productive forces of the country as a whole, breaking up the power of local, you know, nobles to put taxes and tolls on transitive goods through it, setting up factories, you know, trying to get into, you know, advanced production to build up reserves and things like that, gold reserves and so on. So, you know, I think that I know more about him than Bacon, obviously, but I think that might be a fruitful comparison or study to make.
Oh, I guarantee you. Like the thing is LaRouche had particular idiosyncratic biases, I believe. Like, and I would actually.
You said he was French Catholic. He was a Quaker.
Whatever, man. The Quakers are fucking Jesuits to me, man. I'm an old school guy. The Quakers are anarchists, man. That's not much better.
Well, he wasn't like a practicing Quaker in his life. I'm just saying that's.
I know, yeah. But like he has similar idiosyncrasies to actually Richard Nixon, who was also a Quaker, who like went through a very similar thing, right? So I'm very, you know, I like Nixon, like I'm very sympathetic to him in the same sort of way, because I like all of my non-conforming dissenting Puritans and non-conformists, but I like them differently, you know, for different reasons. So yeah, but he has a sort of a like great books curriculum of like, you know, a John Hopkins types of biases. I think he's not really as much of a Christian as he would use his as he would display rhetorically. I think that like I mean you played that speech of his at the conference.
Oh yeah,
and he's talking about Socrates, and I was just thinking of William Blake saying, you know, well, if philosophy was your salvation, then Socrates is the savior and Jesus Christ was nothing. Like,
why can't they be in the same tradition?
Well, they are. Have you read Kierkegaard's The Concept of Irony? He does a very good job of displaying how Christ's irony is different. Use of irony is very different from Socrates. There is a progression here, but there's a part of me that likes to quote Tertullian, and you say like, what does Athens have to do with Jerusalem? And I feel like, you know, my Puritan forebears would be pleased. So because I do think that if you also want to build an American movement, it's called Christianity. You just talk about a Christian economy. Like this is what the Kingfisher was doing, man. You know, every man a king. And he was like, I don't know about this Marx, Engels, these weird German philosophers you're talking about. I'm reading the Bible, folks. And he took his economic policies out of the Bible. And I think if you did the same thing here, you push it. And I think that's where the real power of, like, that's what American pop culture has on its side.
I was just reading from Novum Organum, in which Bacon explicitly attacks people who take their science from Genesis. And here's Winthrop in How the Nation Was Won. The whole earth is the Lord's garden, and he hath given it to the sons of men with a general condition, as in Genesis 1:28. Increase and multiply, replenish the earth and subdue it, which, by the way, Larouche also cites
he's talking about the
origin
existence
of
the
economics.
Man. You know, he's talking about the existence of like the firmament being a like hard border on a like flat earth. That he's not talking about like when he's talking about people taking their science.
But listen to this one. Okay, yeah. He says, you have to tell me, is this esoteric? He says, this is aphorism 19 from book 1. There are and can be only two ways of searching into and discovering truth. The one flies from the senses and particulars to the most general axioms, and from these principles, the truth of which it takes for settled and immovable, proceeds to judgment and to the discovery of middle axioms. And this way is now in fashion. The other derives axioms from the senses and particulars, rising by a gradual and unbroken ascent, so that it arrives at the most general axioms last of all. This is the true way, but as yet untried. It seems to me that he's indicating that the former is Aristotelian, and the latter is his proposed new system, new method.
Yeah, it's Platonic.
That is the place at which we have disagreement.
Okay.
Because,
well, I'm telling you, Francis Bacon was a devout Christian. So, like, when he's saying these things, like, this is important to keep in mind. I think it helps contextualize, like, the like how these could be read out of turn by, say, a day.
A lot of different types of Christians, as I know you just referred to.
I know, but
that doesn't mean anything.
That he was a Rosicrucian. Okay, he was interested in alchemy. He was a Paracelsian.
And why is that a good thing?
Because these are the heroes, man. These are the heroes. These are the heroes.
Did it
Where
contribute?
would you be without alchemy? Where would you be without alchemy?
That's it. That's a great question. I mean, did Kepler discover universal gravitation through alchemy? No.
He was standing on the shoulders of giants.
He explicitly refers to Nicholas of Cusa, who is not an alchemist at all. And the
Nicholas of Cusa, what university is he associated with? Padua?
I realize that. I think he went against them.
I think Francis Walsingham went there or something. Interesting.
I went to Harvard, you know.
I've been, yeah. So
I didn't turn out. I mean, that was part of the MK Ultra part, right? So.
I mean, yeah, you know the tunnels. I know the tunnels. We've been in the tunnels.
But what I'm trying to say is that the method of Cusa, anyone can read De Docta Ignorantia, Unlearned Ignorance, and they can find that he does neither of the two things to which Bacon is referring here.
But like, look at it, like step back and like look at it like a fucking huge time swath, right? Like sure. See providence here, because Cusa, this is all like one coherent tradition, okay? Because he's like on the backs of like Joachim of Fiore and like these like early like Protestant mystics, like proto-Protestant mystics, and these were all tied to alchemical projects. Like this is all like a single continuity over time.
He actually specifies in De Docta Ignorantia that he has made a discovery that no one else has ever made before. And he specifies the exact method of discovery, and it is a method of Platonic hypothesis, which is the thought experiment to which Jason was referring earlier.
Who was holding on to Plato? Why? Who is reading Plato and like the Neoplatonists, etc.? Like what group of people were reading or interested in these things?
Well, Ibn Sina was.
Okay, but I'm saying like where did they get access to these things? Why were they thinking about these things? Like what were they doing?
I mean, they were doing science. I think that you know what I mean.
Exactly. But like who was doing science then?
Look, Ibn Sina is the leading figure in the Islamic Renaissance who was continuing this tradition. I'm not saying this was not part of a tradition. He was not an alchemist. That's not true.
It's such a deeply embedded part of like all of the like world systems that are being built like through this time period is the translation of texts.
I mean, alchemy happened and things were discovered by practitioners of alchemy. I mean, the science of chemistry got a huge boost with Mendeleev and before that Lavoisier and getting out of that. I think. I mean, Lavoisier said, look, we got to, to really reform chemistry, we got to start by cleaning up all the nomenclature and figuring out what's really going on, what transformations are taking place. So, I mean, things happen and were discovered by these people. But
Paracelsus was the first reformer of alchemy, of the alchemical system. The sort of classic, like, he invented.
Right, Lavoisier wasn't an alchemist, and Mendeleev. I'm just saying, like, what came next?
Yeah, because they didn't have to be anymore. No, yeah, exactly. But I'm saying,
they didn't have to be.
The forebears, the seed here, the mustard seed here that blooms into our science is found in alchemy.
Nice if it bloomed a little earlier, though. I mean, I'm just saying. But now do you hear what you're doing? This is now the sort of classic, like, this is where it's like, well, if Rome hadn't collapsed and, if we had kept a single Catholic church the whole time, then science would be so much further ahead than it is now. This is Jesuitism.
I agree with Schiller that world history is a sublime object. And, This is why
Amen.
we have to devote ourselves to some principle. We're not. I don't presume. The whole reason that I'm fighting is because I don't presume that we're going to win.
Well,
That's the whole issue.
You have the greatest principle available to you, which is your Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, of course. So what else do you need? Like you could organize, you could organize everyone here if you have like the biblical hermeneutics to explain how this all goes together. Like this is the real project. I mean, you're going to have a much easier time explaining to Americans biblical economics and the forgiveness of debts and like how debt jubilees and these various other things works, and how natural resources being like the commonwealth of society is like literally in the Bible as the like form of economy prescribed to Christians. How like communism is literally prescribed as like the Christian economy. This is much easier to explain, and it's also true, and it connects more viscerally to the American imagination than anything about European conquests and wars is going to.
Well, the approach that we have is the four laws. We have Glass-Steagall, a national bank. We have the idea of actually
but Americans
using
don't know
public
anything
credit
about those things.
Using public credit to connect the United States to the Belt and Road Initiative to provide for
I'm telling you,
high
the
energy
American
flux
public,
density.
The American public
infrastructure,
hears all that, and it's just gobbledygook.
Yeah, but that's why we're here on your platform.
I know we can explain things, but let's say you're saying that the problem is that we need to educate a lot of people regarding a lot of things in a very short time.
Yeah,
so what is the most efficient means of doing so?
Yeah, but specifically, I'm interested. Well, what you would need would be some kind of an organization and some kind of a news service and some kind of a international reach and notoriety.
What if you could give them something where then they could you just give them the general hermeneutic, and then they can sort of it sort of builds itself from there.
You know what? You can. I don't think that'll do it. I really don't think that'll do it. I literally believe, and this is a faith that I have based on my understanding of things, that if we do not implement the kind of reorganization of the bankrupt system that Glass-Steagall represents, then it will simply fall on the heads of the people. So this is my belief.
It's already doing that.
I'm talking about
piece by piece, not all at once.
Sure, yeah. I'm talking about more like Weimar Germany.
Yeah.
So I have studied this enough that I think that that's the case, because I see that the fictitious assets, that the derivatives bubble and so forth, are not real, and I understand that eventually that has to be reckoned with, that it's not possible for this to continue into perpetuity, and that the process of that is typified by Larouche's triple curve function. It's one that accelerates in a parabolic.
This is also no different than Marx and Engels saying, right, like this system is this is basically just political economy, right? Is that this system is unsustainable, it's going to collapse in its own contradictions.
So but the difference, I think, is that we have a very specific solution to it that is rooted in an American system of economics that has been practiced since our first Treasury Secretary, and that goes back to the Massachusetts Bay Colony, as is reported in this book. That the issue of state control, state-directed credit for the development of infrastructure is something that was the whole basis for the fight for the Republic. That was the whole way that they did it.
No, I agree with you on all of these things, right? But what I'm saying is you're never going to explain all of this to enough people for it to be the bedrock that motivates, motivating them to do anything. But if you tell them that they live in the kingdom of the Antichrist and they read the Bible, there's a pretty good chance that they'll change the government.
Will they change it sufficiently good to a sufficiently good government?
I don't know. We have to make the risk, right? Like you risk you risk something if you want an actual change to occur. There's no way we can know. I mean, Martin Luther, right? Martin Luther summoned it. Like he turned around on the peasant rebellion, but he also inspired it. You know what I mean? So there's cases where pretty much every time something actually this revolutionary, some sort of a reformation or reawakening of the spirit of a people happens, there's always risks.
Well, I guess I would say that I think what's going to happen is the kind of thing that's already happening, but at a higher level, which is that, a lot of people will say, ooh, I never really liked LaRouche, or I used to not like LaRouche, or I didn't think, I hear it all the time. Like, I didn't think he was right, but now you look 10 years later and he's absolutely right, or 20 years later, or whatever. And you're going to have a certain kind of a acceptance of the necessity of the irresistibility of some of these measures, partly because they are the measures that China is taking. They are the ones that has made China successful. And so,
of course, but you really live right now. Americans believe that Christians are being sent to gulag prison camps in China. So what do you do with that? How are you if I believe that, I remember like when I did believe this about China, because that's what everyone says. I had to do a lot of research to see the other side of it. But this is what people believe, right? Like genuinely, like most people.
I have faith that there are perhaps 1,000 to 2,000 potential geniuses in the United States who can grasp what we're talking about at a high level and find within themselves a certain.
You're not a populist, is what I'm getting.
Well, I believe that what people need is leadership. So
sure, but like, what's a good leader? How do you know what a good leader is?
I think it's someone who is imbued with a certain sense of an immortal mission based on a love of mankind, who can see that they need to act now on behalf of the population of the United States and on behalf of the world, and who can ask the question, who but me? Or who will do it if not I?
Well, there's a lot of people, but what if they're just doing that and they're alone? Then they're not a very good leader, right? Because
that's why you got to organize.
Maybe they're a good prophet. Being a prophet's a pretty lonely vocation. But
that's why we got to reach our extraordinarily important young intellectuals and say to them, "Don't you dare leave this country. Stay here and help us."
The Philistines. We're gonna get the Philistines. We'll convert the Philistines.
Right.
Yeah, I don't believe in that. I believe in the people. I think those are like the least likely people to change their minds about anything. Are these young intellectuals you're talking about? They've got too much invested.
You've changed your mind a bunch. You just talked about it.
Oh yeah, but I'm not. I'm a weird guy, man. Like most of the people, most of my cohort is. Yeah, I know, but I'm also not going to be leading your movement.
I'm not expecting that, but I am expecting you to be able to reckon with some of the things that we're saying and recognize that we might be right about certain things that you didn't think we were right about.
For sure.
That's what we need.
Listen,
and other people.
Wait. Let me quiz you on some LaRouche trivia. Okay.
No,
All right. Why is the password in Eyes Wide Shut Fidelio?
I know you say this. You're the source for this. All right. What's your source that this was because Kubrick was subscribed to our magazine? What's your source?
He was.
How do you know that?
Because I do.
Because you can see the coherence.
It was disclosed to me. Disclosed to me.
All right. I'm not surprised by that. by that.
Yeah.
Good.
I mean, there's LaRouche is the EIR is like a big. It's, if anything, it's much closer to the influence that certain subcultural zines and things have had. He's closer in that way to Alex Jones, whereas he's a countercultural figure, where it's not something that it's something you would read next to Ted Kaczynski. That's the package that you're getting all.
Lynn is a folk hero. I'll give you that. But he sat down with Indira Gandhi, the Prime Minister of India, twice. He sat down with Lopez Portillo, the president of Mexico.
He has a very a much more professional reputation across the globe. But I'm saying within America, he's closer to being a folk hero, and closer, and probably only really read by weirdo academics. Who cranks,
Well, you have your opinion.
I'm not saying this is bad.
I know, but I have found that is absolutely not true. That people have
in America.
Yeah, I found that that's not true. There's a wide range of people who participate in what we do. And if you go to the Schiller Institute conference on April 9th, then you will find that many of these people are speaking publicly. Ray McGovern is not a weird crank, or Mike Gravel is not a crank. These people have associated themselves with our movement. Sergei Glaziev is not a crank or a weirdo. These are leaders who are trying to do something for the benefit of the nation and humanity. So Wang Wen of the Chongyang Institute for Finance is not a crank, or Justin Yifu Lin, who recently did an interview with us. So I think you're really underselling it, and that's.
I don't know. I'm just like Ray McGovern is, I don't know. He's just, I know what he did.
You can disagree with him. That's fine. I certainly do. But it's not what you're saying. There's.
I know. I'm just saying.
Yeah.
It's okay. Saying, if you wanted to actually educate a large population in America very swiftly, so that they could see the shit that's going on for what it is, you're going to do so with Jesus on your side, or you're going to fail.
Okay. Let me say the following. I so appreciate what you're saying here, because I realize that you're trying to recruit me and Jason to be communists, and of course we're trying to recruit you to be Larouchean.
Of course, no, but I've already been a Larouchean, man. I've read all the books. I like it. I'm into
more.
It.
I know. So
I know, but I'm saying we need something more than that. That already didn't work.
I don't agree with that, but I mean, plus Larouche's thrown in jail. If we're really good at what we're doing, maybe we'll get thrown in jail. But
like John, I got it all down, man. I'll be on Patmos.
I appreciate that you invited us, and I really, really strongly appreciate it. And it says to me that there's a continued chance for an intellectual, current in the United States that is up to the challenge. That's what I think.
Yeah, I kind of want to inspire you guys to go beyond LaRouche, because I think that LaRouche touches on some things that are correct, but I've over time come to see like that it's a much larger picture than presented, if that makes sense.
I understand what you mean. In the meanwhile, we're studying. I'll put it to you this way. There's an immediate initiative that we have to try to bring about a Treaty of Westphalia for 2022. And, the view of our chairwoman.
You know what you should be fucking doing, man? What you should be doing is making documentaries and things that explain things.
Yeah, but we did. We are. You watched one of them last year. We're doing that.
I know, but you got to do it in a way where it really gets them. You got to have it. It's got to be spiffy. It's got to be fucking good. It's got to be cool.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. All right. I can.
And we should make more documentaries. That's true.
Good idea. If we recruited a bunch of people, then we could do that. So that's what we're trying to do.
Yeah. You want to be talking to rappers. Like you want to have like Lil B on. I'm not joking. You want to be talking to Kanye West about this stuff.
Well, we're trying to get. I mean, if Kanye would read Schiller with us, then we'd be in a great situation.
Dude, do you know how long I've been trying to get Kanye to read Schiller? Come on, we're in this together.
That makes me really happy.
No, it's perfect. Like it literally, like I'm telling you, like there's more potential, I think, in this country than is seen, because I think like LaRouche has like a very like almost Adorno level hatred of pop culture, which I find like very funny, at least personally, because I like, like what, you hate Johnny Cash? Like what the fuck? Like what are you talking about? I love pop culture.
Well, okay, if we're, go back to the Republic, and if you are going to design the most beautiful republic in the world, then how are you going to do it? And I think that you're going to bring my children. I have 2 little children. We play classical music for them. We give them beauty of a classical standard, which is the beauty in which beauty is truth and truth beauty. We treat it from that standpoint.
What about like the beauty of like a fucking sick ass breakdown in like a death metal band? Like what about that? Is there beauty there too?
I don't think that. No, I don't think so. I think that there's something interesting, but I don't think that what is interesting is beautiful.
I think there's a beauty to it. I love it. I like American culture. I'm a fucking troll, man. I like America. Like I like American pop culture. Americans like American pop culture. And I don't think that they're wrong to do so, or that they're somehow missing out on something. if they had listened instead to like classical music.
Oh, they're
it's
definitely
like,
missing something, and partly that's the policy of the oligarchy. I mean, if you look at all of them, you talk about cultural programming all the time, and you know it's top down, and that's what Larouche is pointing out to you. Lynn was around, you know, when
of course,
the Congress for Cultural Freedom.
He couldn't differentiate the things like that were good from the things that were bad.
Look into the Congress for Cultural Freedom. I know you have a lot. And ask yourself, why is it that Sidney Hook and his associates, including Bertrand Russell was involved, made sure that the classical tradition of Brahms, Mozart, Beethoven, Bach, and so forth was
because they thought it was fascist.
Huh?
Because they thought it was fascist.
That's what they claimed. That was their excuse.
Yeah. Well, I believe them. I think that they're just like that. People would do that now. Are you kidding me? They're going to start removing Dostoevsky because, like, on curriculums. Like, that just seems like a liberal thing to do to me, right?
You can look into this. I will share some. I don't have any like quotes offhand and so forth, but I'll share some material with you to demonstrate that they knew what they were doing. Bertrand Russell writes about it extensively. He explicitly says that 3-minute songs with repetitive songs in tone to, or lyrics in tone to music is a great way to brainwash people. And, so.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
But the question is, in such a form, like, let's say that you were pressed into the form of a 3-minute pop song, and this form has been designed, right? It's been designed to be a brainwashing thing. Do you believe in the power of human creativity, that they could reverse engineer this and turn it into a vehicle for the production of truth and beauty?
Or do you believe there could be much better 3-minute pop songs? They certainly could be better.
There's so many good.
Is that ones. The best, right? I mean, is that
There's
the limit?
So many good 3-minute pop songs that are beautiful.
Well, this is the next topic for our next discussion, because I really hope you will invite us again, or maybe I can invite you, which is to say, excellent. What are the just briefly, what are the principles of beauty? I think that's a wonderful thing to discuss. I think it has a lot to do with how we're going to win.
See, I'm more of like, I'll accept your submission in sonnet form or not at all. And I will be scanning the meter. I will be looking for irregularities. I will be judging. We'll see. Put your money where your mouth is. All right. So I expect you to have a sonnet next time we speak on that subject. I
really appreciate that challenge, and I will live up to it.
Okay. All right. Well, it's been nice talking to you guys about this book. We kind of talked about it, but I think we had a good conversation nonetheless. I still recommend this book to all of my listeners, How the Nation Was Won by H. Graham Lowry. It's pretty good. All right. Peace out, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Exit the car. Don't turn your back. He won't be long. He's coming back. I see you again. Yeah. I see you again. I see you again. Hold on. I feel you again. Yeah. I feel you again. I feel you again. Yeah. It won't be long. He will be back. He will be back. Jesus, my Lord. Speak, oh God. Speak, oh God. Speak, oh God. Speak, oh God. He gave it all. He gave it all. Jesus, my Lord. He gave it all. He gave it all. He gave it all. Jesus, my Lord. He gave it all. He won't be long. He won't be long. He will be back. He will be back. Jesus, my Lord. He knows us all. He gave it all. He gave it all. He broke the fall. He saved us all. The Son of God, the Lamb of God. He spilled His blood. He paid the cost. Jesus, my Lord, He loves us all. ripped the veil, he split the veil. The demons fell, those demons fell. He conquered hell, he rose again and made us well. He loves us all, he gave it all. He won't be long, he will be back. He will be back, he will be back. Answer the call, answer the call. Don't turn your back, don't turn your back. He won't be long, he won't be long. He's coming back, he is coming back. He gave it all, he gave it all. He broke the fall, he saved us all. The Son of God, the Lamb of God. He spilled his blood, he paid the cost. Jesus, my Lord, he loves us all, he loves us all. He gave it all, he gave it all. He broke the fall, he saved us all, he saved us all.